Hey y'all! For this project, I encourage you to find a still frame from a favorite film. Try and find a still that encapsulates a moment of connection or conflict between at least two characters. You are welcome to have more people in your still frame than two. I've chosen this image from the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, which feels like a kind of pivotal moment for the main character that Michelle Yeoh plays. And I also just really liked how there's three figures that are all engaged in some kind of action. They all kind of have their own psychological moment going on. Um, and the main character's husband is displayed as kind of like a reflection. So we're almost like looking through a window into this scene. So there's a lot of interesting, surreal lighting happening in this image, which I thought could be a really fun and interesting challenge. Um, I encourage you to make a pen and ink drawing, starting out with pencil for your gesture drawing, and then you're welcome to use a combination of Micron pen, felt tip pen, and ink wash. So I use India ink in various tones of gray in order to build up value. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So I'm starting with gesture. I'm really thinking about first drawing a square or rectangle that helps me to figure out where the edges of my picture plane are going to be. This can be helpful because this way, if I make things a little bit too large, I'm able to just sort of move those borders out a bit. It also just helps me feel a little bit more confident with the edges of my image. You're welcome to tape off your page if you'd like. So I'm starting with really thinking about the major sections of anatomy, and I'm really thinking about how this first figure is going to be placed in the overall composition. So I'm starting out with sort of like an egg shape for her torso. For her rib cage, I'm loosely blocking out how her arms and hands are placed in proportion to her torso, as well as the placement of her head. I'm using some sighting skills, so I'm really kind of thinking about looking at the horizontal and vertical kind of imaginary lines that we can drop in the middle of the image, always looking back to my reference image for help. And I'm looking for those vertical and horizontal lines so I can then measure the angles between things. So as I'm jotting down Michelle Yeoh's head here, I'm thinking about the axis of the planes of her face. So, we have kind of like a 3/4 view. So we have the front of her head as well as a bit of the side. So figuring out where that central axis of her face is going to sort of move through is going to really help me situate things accurately. I'm also quickly moving from one figure into another because the relationship between the figures is one of the most important things in my image. So it's really important that instead of jumping into detail or really even sorting out the details within one figure, that you're moving quickly from one figure to the next, from one large section of the composition into another, as a way of getting an overall sort of set of proportions where the biggest shapes, which are really like these three human forms, are going to be taking up space within the entire composition. So it's really important that we're thinking general here, and then later we're going to get more specific and we'll be able to suss out the details and really make corrections as we go. But at first, I'm really thinking about measuring. So notice how I popped in that horizontal line that tells me that generally the sort of bottom half of Michelle Yeoh's nose is lining up with the bottom of Jamie Lee Curtis's chin. So that helps me just sort of situate the relationship and the sort of height in the picture plane that I should put that second figure. I'm always looking for angles, jotting them down, and again, I'm using these really gestural lines. I'm making more marks than I need, and some of these lines are more correct than others. So using a pencil for this stage is really helpful because I'm able to work quickly and loosely and work the entire image. And later on, when I switch to pen, I'll be able to get a little bit more specific and really hone which are those lines that I need to keep and which lines do I need to kind of disregard and erase later on. So I am moving over this third figure's face like 3 or 4 times. You'll notice I placed him in one sort of section of the composition, and then I realize that his face is too far to the left, so I'll need to shift it over quite a bit. It's okay if you're doing a bit of erasing and moving things around for this first layer, but please don't get into shading yet, because you're just getting a roadmap that you're then going to fill with ink. So if you get into shading, you're going to end up taking way too long on the first step, and by the time you get into your pen and ink, you're going to be really fatigued, and you probably aren't going to be able to build it up to the level that you want. So don't worry about shading yet. Right now we're just laying a roadmap for the proportions, for the anatomy, and how the overall image works structurally. So this is, if you've taken my painting class, this is kind of like the underpainting stage of the drawing. So notice when I'm drawing these hands, first I'm really kind of thinking about the overall shape of the palm and the fingers. You can kind of think about it like a mitten that we can then sort of separate out into the smaller details of the fingers. So once I feel like I have a decent amount of information jotted down with my pencil, then it's a good time to go ahead and get into the pen and ink. So I'm starting with a thin Micron pen, and I'm starting to really just emphasize which lines are correct first. I'm starting to go through each figure and bring things into a little bit more detail. And I'm also starting to think about lighting and texture. So notice how I use several different kinds of mark making in order to build up value in this image. So I'm using a lot of wrapping lines that wrap around sort of like the cylinders. I have a lot of kind of organic wrapping lines in the face, as well as directional lines that show the direction of the light. And then I also have textural lines and stippling sometimes that helps me convey the floral pattern on Michelle Yeoh's shirt. At a certain point, I'm ready to erase all of my graphite, and then I start blocking in ink wash. So I mix up several different values of ink using India ink and water in various ratios, and I recommend always testing out your ink wash on a separate sheet of paper so you know just how dark it will be before you put it on your drawing. And in hindsight, after making this drawing, I realized that I really wish that I had done a lot more of the ink wash first before doing all of that hatching. I think that the hatching works well, but there's certain things that I think I could have conveyed just through ink wash, and then I could have let that dry and added my hatching afterwards. So it's up to you how you, what sort of steps you take. As long as you begin with gesture and work general to specific, you may want to try working right from your first contour line Micron pen drawing and jumping straight into your ink wash, and then letting that dry, and then coming back for all of your hatching and various textural mark making. But it's really important that we're building up a sense of relative value throughout the image. So I'm thinking about the biggest masses of shadow and how they relate to those smaller areas. I'm really thinking about blocking out an entire large shape with a light wash, which helps those brightest moments in the image really feel bright. So there's only a few moments in this image where it is truly white or a pretty light tone. And in order for me to really make it feel like the relative value is working accurately and make it feel like those glowing, really lit up moments are lit up, is for me to set everything else back in value by toning everything with some subtle layers of washes. And I recommend starting light with your washes and then allowing them to get darker. Keep in mind you can also use a combination of the washes and the hatching and various kinds of mark making in order to build up value. I recommend always letting your washes dry before you go in with Micron pen or before you go in with a second layer of wash. But there's so many ways for y'all to really make these cinematic drawings of yours come to life. So I really encourage you to experiment, see what works for you. I learned a ton from this drawing, and I'm sure you're going to learn a lot from yours. Also, just one little note that while this video is only 10-15 minutes long, this drawing, I think I put in about 8 hours of drawing. It was a lot of work. So don't be deceived by the time lapse. I worked through a lot of problems. I probably have like a long list of things I might have done differently, such as working in ink wash before doing a bunch of my hatching. I also noticed after the fact that some of my proportions are totally off, so I made Michelle Yeoh's head too small. Her thumb isn't quite long enough. There's some of these things that I wish I had sorted out in my initial pencil drawing stage, where I was just figuring out the roadmap of my proportions, that I rushed a little bit too quickly into those value moments. So I wasn't able to really stop, take a step back, and evaluate my proportions to the level that I wanted. So I recommend really evaluating your proportions before you start going into ink. Y'all are always welcome to send me images in progress, and I'm happy to give you feedback. But happy drawing. I can't wait to see what you make. Thanks for watching, y'all.